Archaeologists uncover centuries-old cherries in the mansion cellar of George Washington's Mount Vernon home.
Something was buried under George Washington's home for nearly 250 years, and no one had any idea it was there. Not historians, not experts, not Mount Vernon's own staff. Then, during a major renovation in 2024, archaeologists broke through the dirt floor of the mansion's cellar and froze. Dozens of sealed, untouched 18th-century glass bottles sat hidden in the ground, exactly where someone left them before the American Revolution. And inside them, not dust, not debris, but perfectly preserved cherries and berries that had survived since the mid-17th century. Food older than the United States. And this was only the first shocking discovery. Because what archaeologists uncovered next would change the way we see Mount Vernon and the people who lived there forever. The empty cellar. For years, the cellar under George Washington's mansion was seen as nothing special. Just a dark storage area with dirt floors, old walls, and a low ceiling. Workers had walked over this ground countless times. Historians had mapped every room of Mount Vernon. The place felt familiar, predictable. But in 2024, during the $40 million mansion revitalization project, a small team of archaeologists began removing layers of dirt from the cellar floor. The job was routine. Nobody expected anything unusual. They thought they were simply preparing the area for structural repairs. Then one archaeologist's shovel hit something hard. At first, they thought it was a rock. But when the dirt was brushed away, glass appeared. Old glass, thick, hand-blown, and still sealed. And then another bottle, and another. Soon, the team realized they were standing above a hidden pit no one knew existed. Inside that pit were 35 sealed glass bottles, untouched since the 1700s. What made the find truly shocking wasn't the bottles themselves. It was what was inside them. These bottles held food, real food, that had somehow survived for nearly 250 years. Cherries, berries, fruit stems, organic material that should have rotted away centuries ago, yet remained protected by the cool earth and sealed glass. The moment experts realized the fruit still had structure, it was a time capsule, a window into pre-revolutionary life. Archaeologists believe the bottles were placed there sometime between 1758 and 1776, the years when Mount Vernon was becoming Washington's main home. The storage pits were intentional, used to keep food cool before refrigerators existed. But no one expected anything inside to survive. Even more surprisingly, historians quickly realized these bottles weren't just random leftovers. They were signs of skill, planning, and knowledge. Someone who knew exactly how to cut, store, and seal food so it would last. And that raised a new question. Whose hands prepared these bottles, and why were they hidden so deep underground? The answer didn't point to George Washington. It pointed to the people whose work shaped Mount Vernon every day, and whose stories had long been buried, just like the bottles. And uncovering those stories would lead archaeologists to something even more powerful. The hidden work. When the bottles were lifted from the cellar pit, historians knew one thing instantly. These were not the work of an amateur. The fruit inside had been carefully prepared. The stems were left on with intention. The cherries were snipped cleanly, not torn. The bottles were sealed tightly enough to survive centuries underground. This level of care pointed directly to the skilled labor force that powered Mount Vernon every single day. The enslaved workers whose knowledge and effort kept the estate running, Mount Vernon did not function without them. They planted the fields, cooked the meals, raised the livestock, maintained the gardens, and carried out the work that made the property look polished and powerful. Among them were highly trained cooks who knew how to preserve food so it could last through winters, shortages, and long stretches without fresh harvests. One of the most important cooks was a woman named Doll. Brought to Mount Vernon by Martha Washington in 1759, Doll was known for her skill in the kitchen. She oversaw food preparation, managed supplies. If anyone at Mount Vernon could preserve fruit with such precision, it was someone under her direction. Experts now believe that the bottles found in the cellar were not Washington's personal project. They were the product of quiet, consistent labor, done by enslaved people who had no choice, yet carried out their work with remarkable knowledge and skill. Their judgment decided how to pack each bottle so the contents would stay fresh. And then the bottles were set aside, forgotten, covered by time, soil, and the noise of a nation being born. This discovery forced historians to pause. It reminded them that the lives of enslaved people were not just documented in written records. Handmade tools, and now in bottles of cherries that survived centuries underground. But the bottles were only the beginning. Once scientists opened them and began examining the fruit inside, they found even more clues, tiny details that revealed how advanced this preservation work truly was. The analysis of artifacts. Once the sealed bottles were safely removed from the cellar, the next challenge began: understanding exactly what was inside them. Scientists and archaeologists gathered around tables, armed with microscopes, lights, and protective tools. Everyone expected the fruit to crumble the moment it was exposed to air. After all, it had been buried for more than 2 centuries. But something unexpected happened. When the first bottle was opened, the cherries inside still held their shape. They weren't fresh, of course, but they were recognizable, intact, and organized exactly the way someone had packed them in the 1700s. The cellar's cool environment, combined with the airtight seal, had created a natural vault. Inside the bottles, researchers counted 54 cherry pits and 23 stems. They weren't broken or twisted. They had been cut cleanly with shears. This tiny detail proved the fruit had been harvested with intention, not rushed or scraped together. The cherries appeared to be from a tart variety, which naturally contained more acidity. Someone at Mount Vernon had chosen the right fruit for long-term storage, showing real knowledge of food science long before refrigeration existed. These clues led researchers to an exciting possibility. The fruit might still contain DNA. Samples were sent to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service to extract genetic material from the preserved pits. If successful, they could identify the exact species of cherry and compare it with databases of heirloom fruit varieties. This kind of biological preservation is almost unheard of in American archaeology. Every pit and stem carries information from a world that disappeared centuries ago. As archaeologists continued working across the estate, they followed another trail, one that didn't lead to bottles or fruit. It led to a place where hundreds of lives were lived behind the mansion, in a home that held its own secrets beneath the floorboards. The hidden life. While the fruit bottles were astonishing, another discovery at Mount Vernon revealed something far deeper about the people who lived there, the people whose names often never made it into the history books. Archaeologists turned their focus to the House for Families, the main home for the enslaved community who lived and worked on the Mansion House farm. This building once held dozens of men, women, and children at the same time. But what shocked experts wasn't the structure itself. It was what lay underneath it. When the cellar floor was carefully removed, a massive trash pit appeared. At first, it looked like ordinary soil mixed with fragments. But once the dirt was sifted and cleaned, scientists realized they were looking at something extraordinary. Over 24,000 animal bones from 53 different species. This was not random waste. It was a record of how enslaved people found ways to survive, adapt, and quietly push back against their limited rations. Most plantation narratives say enslaved workers ate mainly cornmeal, salted fish, and small portions of meat. But the bones told a very different story. They showed that the enslaved families at Mount Vernon were resourceful and determined to build fuller. They hunted wild animals like rabbits, raccoons, and deer. They fished in nearby waterways, bringing in freshwater catfish. They raised their own chickens. They gardened. Alongside the bones, archaeologists found beads, coins, and pottery pieces known as colonaware, items linked to African traditions. These objects were more than artifacts. They were symbols of identity, memory, and quiet resistance. Even in harsh conditions, people worked to keep parts of their culture alive. Each find added another layer to the truth. Mount Vernon was not only Washington's home. It was also a community shaped by the hands, skills, and strength of enslaved individuals. And as the excavations widened, archaeologists soon uncovered something that pushed the story even further. A discovery that connected daily life to one of Washington's most ambitious industries: whiskey, work, and innovation. The hidden lives of Mount Vernon's enslaved community were only part of the story. Just a short walk from the mansion and the house for families lay one of George Washington's most ambitious ventures, his distillery. Archaeologists had long suspected the location, but it wasn't until careful excavation that the true scale became clear. Foundations, masonry, drains, and soil patterns revealed the outlines of the distillery, once home to 5 massive stills and a boiler that powered them. Documents from 1803, including insurance schematics, confirmed what the diggers found. At its height, Washington's distillery produced nearly 11,000 gallons of rye whiskey in a single year, making it one of the largest in the nation. But the distillery was more than a business. It was a place where the enslaved workers' expertise, skill, and labor were critical. They managed complex processes, grinding grain, controlling heat, operating machinery, and storing the finished whiskey. Archaeologists argue that without their knowledge and daily work, the distillery would never have reached its impressive scale. Every careful pour and fired boiler reflected a team effort, much of it invisible to history. What fascinated researchers most was the combination of archaeology and documentary evidence. Soil analysis revealed residues of rye and fermentation. This reconstruction also gave a new perspective on how Washington managed his estate. He wasn't just a president or a military leader, he was a hands-on entrepreneur, deeply involved in experimental processes that required both precision and labor. And the success of these ventures depended on the enslaved workers' skill, planning, and endurance. Yet, the distillery told only part of the story. While whiskey production was impressive, Mount Vernon's landscapes, gardens, and orchards held secrets that had been hidden for centuries. Patterns of planting, tree placement, and garden layouts had been misunderstood, sometimes reconstructed incorrectly based on 19th century assumptions rather than 18th century reality. It was these gardens, carefully mapped and studied through modern technology, that revealed the next layer of Washington's ingenuity, connecting his daily life, his enslaved community, and the land itself in ways no written record could fully capture. Secrets of the Gardens. Mount Vernon's grandeur wasn't just in its mansion or distillery. It stretched across carefully planned gardens, orchards, and fields. For years, historians assumed the estate's upper garden followed the crescent-shaped beds seen in 19th century sketches. But archaeological work and modern mapping tools told a very different story. Using geographic information systems technology and soil analysis, researchers uncovered the estate's true 18th century layout. Long, linear rows replaced the curved beds, showing that Washington's design prioritized practicality and productivity over later aesthetic trends. Beneath these beds, soil analysis revealed traces of fruit trees, herbs, and vegetables, some dating back to Washington's original plantings. In fact, they identified the remains of a mid-18th century fruit tree nursery, likely one of Washington's first attempts at cultivating apples, cherries, and other orchard staples. The discovery offered more than just garden blueprints. It revealed Washington's approach to food security and estate management. Each tree, row, and planting bed reflected a system built to sustain the mansion, the distillery, and the enslaved community who maintained the land. Archaeologists noted careful spacing patterns, all evidence of advanced agricultural practices that were rare in colonial America. Interestingly, some of the garden's design appeared experimental. Researchers found soil pits and planting patterns that suggested Washington tested different varieties of fruit trees and vegetables. Combined with the previously discovered preserved cherries and berries in the cellar, it became clear that Mount Vernon was a living laboratory for both food preservation and cultivation. But the gardens also reflected the hidden labor of the enslaved workers. Every row planted, every tree pruned, and every harvest collected depended on their knowledge, endurance, and skill. While Washington's name is etched in history, these discoveries provided tangible proof that the estate's success relied heavily on the enslaved community's labor and ingenuity. The reconstructed maps of the gardens not only corrected historical misunderstandings, but also revealed the connection between the mansion, the distillery, and the farmland. Everything was interlinked, from planting to harvest, processing to storage, creating a full picture of the 18th century estate life. As researchers stepped back to examine these patterns, it became clear that Mount Vernon held even more hidden stories, personal artifacts, remnants of daily life, and traces of African traditions preserved by the enslaved community. These finds opened the door to understanding the people who lived and labored there beyond Washington himself, revealing the human stories buried beneath the soil. Legacy. The discoveries across Mount Vernon were more than objects or data. They were stories buried beneath the earth, waiting for centuries to speak. After the garden's layout, the distillery's foundations, and the preserved bottles had all been analyzed, one truth became clear. The estate was not solely George Washington's creation, especially those of the enslaved community whose work underpinned every aspect of life at Mount Vernon. Walking through the estate now, archaeologists could see patterns that had long been invisible. The fruit tree nursery is linked to the cellar bottles. And beneath it all, the land preserved echoes of people who had toiled quietly, shaping every success while leaving few records behind. These insights also reframed Washington's vision. His estate management, ambitious agricultural experiments, and production ventures were only possible because of the skill, intelligence, and resilience of those enslaved workers. Every row of crops, every harvested fruit, every batch of whiskey carried its expertise. The estate's design, its innovation, and its very functionality were intertwined with human stories that modern archaeology was finally revealing in tangible form: preservation and resourcefulness. These weren't isolated efforts. They were part of a living system where each component supported the others. The bottles in the cellar, the carefully spaced trees, and the reconstructed distillery were all evidence of foresight and interconnected labor. As the sun sets over the Potomac, the estate no longer feels like a static monument. Mount Vernon is alive with evidence of creativity, endurance, and ingenuity. The discoveries show a complex network of lives and knowledge preserved beneath the surface, uniting the past with the present. Every detail, from a cherry stem cut centuries ago to the arc of a garden row, speaks to the enduring human influence on the land. And in that continuity lies the final revelation. Mount Vernon is not just a home of history, but a testament to the people who made it work, their skills, and the legacy they left woven quietly into the soil. The soil has been sifted, the bottles opened, the bones counted. And yet, what these discoveries reveal will stay in history forever. It shows us that Mount Vernon isn't just George Washington's home. It's full of hidden stories. From perfectly preserved cherries to personal artifacts, every find tells a story that most history books never mention. So what do you think? Were these just old artifacts, or windows into a world we've never truly seen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story, hit the like button and subscribe. Also, turn on the notifications bell so you don't miss out on more shocking discoveries like this one. Until next time, see ya.